with that said, let's go back and do a little bit of review, put some of these things in place with my fancy new illustrations. Okay, so let's remind ourselves what we're talking about. There's a Mishnah here in the Nachot that says that all of the kelim in the Mikdash, their length went the length of the Beit HaMikdash. Just to remind ourselves again, so the length of the Beit HaMikdash went east to west, and it was 60 amot long. 20 amot of that was the Kodesh HaKodeshim, and 40 amot of that was the Kodesh, the Heichal. And today, the illustrations are going to focus just on the Heichal. So the sugya begins by bringing a braita that says all of the in the Mikdash, their length went the length of the house of the Beit HaMikdash, except for the Aron. In the Aron, the length of it went along the width of the Beit HaMikdash. In other words, it went from north to south, pointed north to south. And so then we discuss how to essentially, well, I won't go through all the sugya again, but there's a discussion here about how we know that, and we know it by figuring out certain things about the placement of the badim. We understood the badim must have been placed on the width side of the aron, so that there would be sufficient room, 2 people to carry it in front and 2 people to carry it in back, or on the other side. And then the other thing I know is that the badim of the aron came right up to the parochet and poked at the parochet. So I know that the badim were going from east to west. Therefore, I know that the length of the aron was going from north to south. So that's how I set up to understand the aron. And then we get into this discussion about the 10 shulchanot that Shlomo made and the 10 menorot that Shlomo made. So I want to point out something that started to be, I don't have an answer for this, but I think it's worth pointing out. So the Gemara here brings a braita, Tanu Rabbanan Asara Shulchanot Asa Shlomo HaMelech, Shenema B'Yas Shulchanot Asara B'Yanach B'Echal Chamisham Yamin V'Chamisham Yismol. Right, so the pasuk says that Shlomo made 10 shulchanot. He placed them in the Heichal, 5 on the right and 5 on the left. So, Im Talmar Chamisham Yamin HaPetach, Chamisham Yismol HaPetach. So if you say that the pasuk, this pasuk from Divrei Yamim, describing the placement of the shulchanot, if you say it means that there were 5 to the right of the entrance and 5 to the left of the entrance, so then that would mean that we would find a shulchan, or in Rashi's Girsa shulchanot, 5 shulchanot in the south of the Heichal. But Torah Rabba shulchan titain al tzeret tzafon. When the Torah describes the shulchan, it says it has to be on the northern side. So here I can actually make use of one of my illustrations. So this area here is the Heichal, and this is proportional 1 centimeter to 1 amah. It's 1 to 1, 1 centimeter to 1 amah. So, right, so the length is 40 by 20. And so there's a havamina that I would take still getting used to this. Yeah. That I would take and put 5 shulchanot here, and then 5 shulchanot here. But if that would be true, and I end up with 5 shulchanot in the south, right? This is the north side, this is the east side, this is the south side. So then there would be 5 note in the south part of the Heichal. Torah says that the shulchan has to be in the north, and presumably all subsequent shulchanot are going to have to be in the north. So Moshe be'emtza chamisha miyamino v'chamisha mismalo. So rather, it must mean that Moshe's was in the middle, and there were 5 to the right of it and 5 to the left of it. Rashi here says, Moshe be'emtza chamisha miyamino bidromo. In other words, there were 5 to the south of Moshe's, but not in the southern part of the Heichal. And 5 to the left of Moshe's, which would be in the north. But all of them will be in the northern part of the Heichal. And later on, it's going to explain they were placed. So what I want to point out here, I didn't note in the last year. So the Gemara here already in the beginning of this part of the Sugya comes to the conclusion that the Shulchanot of Shlomo are divided into 2 rows. And they learn it because of this pasuk. Because the pasuk says there are 5 on the right and 5 on the left. So, right? So that's there's a source for it. There's a textual source. And so from that I understand that there must have been those, right? It's mifurash. So all of that to say, a little bit later, I'll remind you, but we'll see it again in a moment. A little bit later, the Gemara asks a series of questions based on the assumption on the Havamina that the 10 Shulchanot were in one straight line. And then it rejects it and says, no, they must have been in 2 straight lines. So it occurred to me as I was reviewing the sugya again for the shir, that why would they ever have thought that the Shulchanot were in one straight line? They already established at the beginning of the sugya that they're in 2 lines. So keep that question line. We'll come to it again. And I don't have an answer yet. And I was looking to see if any of the Farshim talk about it. I haven't found anything. But the point is, at this point, early on in the Sugya, we understand that the Shulchan are 2 lines. And Moshe's Shulchan is going to be in the middle. Now that's an important point because we don't know exactly what that means. And that's one of the things we talked about last time. We'll go over it again this time. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we have essentially the same discussion about the menorot. Eser menorot asa Shlomo. Shlomo made 10 menorot. Shene'amar. Just a second. Vayaset menorot azahav. Right, so we have a similar pasuk about the 10 menorot, that there were 5 on the right and 5 on the left, and then we ask the same question. So if you say it means that there are 5 on the right of the entrance and 5 on the left of the entrance, then that means that we find there's the menorah, or the 5 menorot are going to be in the north, and we learn in the Torah already that can't be, because Torah says, Tam Norah Nochach HaShulchan. As we pointed out last time, the hemshech of that pasuk is Samtet Shulchan Michutz Brocha B'Norah Nochach HaShulchan Al Tzela HaMishkan Teiman. Right, so the had to be on the southern side. So Moses has had to be in the middle, 5 on the right and 5 on the left. Hello, Michael. We're doing a very quick summary here because this week I also made better illustrations. One of what I want to point out though is at the beginning of the sugya when we're establishing was to establish the placement of the menorot and the shulchanot. We know already the Gemara brings two brightot that already established at the outset that the shulchanot were divided into two rows and the menorot were also divided into two rows. And in terms of their placement, then we have these two brightot. One of them says that they were placed, the shulchan, here Rashi says it's talking about the shulchanot because that seems to be the main topic that the Gemara continues with, that they were placed halfway through the bayit and inward. And we have another bayit that says that they were placed a third of the bayit and inward. And so how, there's a contradiction, right? So, but the answer is that it depends what you're measuring from. So if you're measuring from the length of the heichal is 40, so halfway through 40 is 20. But if you're measuring the whole length of the bayit, then it's a third of the bayit, right? Because the bayit is 60 in length, and so the first third will be 20. Okay, so now we know that the shulchanot are going to be in this area. So again, this is the heichal, and I've divided into quadrants. This is the north side, the south side, that's the east side, telling us that the shulchanot are going to be in this area here. They're going to be in this 20 by 10 area. This is this from here to here is 20. The whole length is 40, and from here to here is 20. So that is 10. So this is an area that's 10 by. So all of the shulchanot have to fit into here. So now we come to the next part. Tanu Rabbanan, Mizrach u'Ma'arav hayu menachin. Rebbe says that the shulchanot were going from east to west, and Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon Omer tzafon v'doram. The shulchanot going from north to south. So the Gemara asks, my time of the Rebbe, what's the reasoning of Rabbi? Gamari menorah. He learns it from the menorah. The menorah, just as the menorah went from east to west, of Haninami Mizrach u'Ma'arav. So the shulchanot is going to be pointing east to west. East to west meaning so then that will be like the Mishnah that says that the kelim in the Beit HaMikdash, their length went along the length of the house. East to west will be the long side. They're going from east to west. That's Rebbe. So then the Gemara challenges that, says that, how does Rebbe know to begin with that the menorah goes from east to west? So then we learn this idea, Yarochoto Aron Lifnei Hashem, Michal Dekuhu Lav Lifnei Hashem. Aaron has to set up the ner. He has to set up a lamp that's going to be Lifnei Hashem. And so it implies that there's one ner that's Lifnei Hashem, and it implies that all the rest of them are not Lifnei Hashem, or somehow less Lifnei Hashem, further away. And Lifnei Hashem here meaning in close to or in front of the Kodesh HaKodeshim. And the Gemara says for Rebbe, so if you would think that the menorah going from north to south, then all of the neirot of the menorah are going to be equidistant from Lifnei Hashem, and I won't have one single one that's Lifnei Hashem. So Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, why why does he say that the shulchan and the menorah go from north to south? He learns it from the Aron. So then we say to Rebbe, so why doesn't Rebbe learn from the Aron? So he says we learn the outer kelim from the outer kelim, and we don't learn the outer kelim from the inner kli, which is the Aron. Rabbi Elazar Shimon says, so you turn around to him, so you should learn from the menorah like Rebbe. So he says, no, but the menorah itself also went from north to south. Just like he held by the Shulchan, he says the menorah also went from north to south. So how does he stand Yarochoto Aaron Avanav? So he comes up with this, or he had this tradition, I don't want to say comes up with, he held that the menorah would have looked something like this, that each side of the menorah, all of the neirot are going to, the middle ner, and that middle ner is going to point westward. It's going to point toward the Kodesh HaKodeshim. But the whole menorah itself is going from north to south, so it's parallel to the Kodesh HaKodeshim. Okay. So then the Gemara says, Bishlama l'mandamar mizrachu marav. So according to the mandamar who says that the Shulchan Aruch went from east to west. So who was that? Who said that they went from east to west?
I checked.
That's okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
It's just a few lines earlier.
Yeah. It's Rebbe.
Rebbe. So Rebbe holds that they go from east to west. So according to Rebbe, who holds the Shulchan Aruch from east to west, Hainu dahavi yative asara be'esrim. So that's how we understand that you could have 10 sitting in 20. That is, you can have 10 shulchanot sitting in an area that's 20 amot long. So here I'll show you. So over here I've made 10 shulchanot, one right next to you. Each one of them is also proportional, right? It's one centimeter on the map. Here's 1 amma in our sugya. So if I have 10 shulchanot head to head going from east to west, so that's fine because I can take all of them. Oops. Hold on.
Undo it.
Yeah. I can move them and stick them in that area. And they will all be in the tzafon, and they will all be past this line of demarcation of the first 20 amos, right? So this is the quadrant they have to be in. They fit perfectly. So I don't have an issue according to Rebbe. Right? But if you say like Rabbi Elazar ben Shimon, if you say like Rabbi Elazar ben Shimon, the Mandamar says you're going from north to south. How can I have 10 in 20? In other words, I made his Shulchan Aruch green for contrast. If I take that, if I say they're going from north to south, they're going to look like this. And I'm going to have them taking up the whole width of the Heichal. They'll take up the whole width of the Heichal. So the Gemara puts it like this: Asara be'esrim Heichal b'yasi. How can you get 10 to sit in 20? In other words, as Rashi explains, just technically, how do you do that? Because your measurements would have to be so completely precise that everything would just fit. When I put them from east to west, I have wiggle room because this, the whole area is open. So if they're going from east to west, if it sticks out a little bit here past the line of demarcation that I made, I would still say that, the vast majority of all of the shulchanot are in the both in the north and in the upper half of the Heichal. Here, I don't have any wiggle room. How am I going to stuff 10 shulchanot that are 2 amot long into an area that's exactly 20 amot? So that's the first question. The second question, just a second. Second question is the Tanim Hechi Havu Ayri. If you say they're going from north to south, now I have blocked the entire width of the Heichal. So how are the Kohanim going to be able to go in? How they can't get past the Shulchanot. Shulchanot b'darom. Moreover, I now have 5 shulchanot that are in the south side, and we already established that they all have to be in the north. The 2, and furthermore, furthermore, these are the 10 shulchanot of Shlomo. But what about the shulchan of Moshe? Right? So I have one more shulchan. Where is it going to go? Where can I put it? So the Gemara now says, Ulata Amech. So the Gemara takes the last question and turns it around on the person asking. It says, Ulata Amech, according to your reasoning, the man the Amma Marav Nami, Shulchan de Moshe Hecha Haba Manachle. So even if you hold like Rebbe and the Shulchanot are going from east to west, still, where am I going to put Moshe's Shulchan? So, once again, so the underlying supposition is now the Shulchan. I'm looking at the Shulchanot as if that set up as a single line. And I think we can understand this last question, the Shulchan of Moshe, Hecha Manachle. Where would you put Moshe's Shulchan? The underlying assumption would be that Moshe's Shulchan should be in the same line, that they should all be in one line. And once I have an 11th Shulchan, then, as we say, all bets are off, because now I can't possibly get 11 Shulchanot in the upper 20 amot of the Heichal. So what I pointed out earlier is there's something strange, though, about this line of questioning in the Gemara, where the underlying assumption is that all of the Shulchanot are in one line. Because just a minute ago, in the beginning of the Sugya, we established, based on a pasuk in Divrei Hayamim, that the Shulchanot were not line; they were in 2 lines. So it's not clear to me why the Gemara would make this assumption. I understand it as a pedagogical tool, because now when I answer all the questions, I'm going to be able to put a lot of things together. But it's still very strange. It's as if this part of the Sugya didn't know about the brata that was brought just a minute ago in the Gemara. So I don't know why that is, but That's just the way it works out in the Gemara. So now the Gemara says, Elami savat chaddarahava tredarin. So the answer is, rather, do you think that they were in one line? They were in two lines. Okay. So now I understand. Now they're in two lines. And let's look here at Rashi again. So Rashi says, according to the one who says that the Shulchanot went from east to west, so where was Moshe's Shulchan? Then we would find that this Shulchan, Shulchan, this one would be sitting entirely in outer 20 amot. So I think Rashi understands the question like this, right? So the question there was being asked according to the Manda Ammar, who said that we're going from north to south, and they say, so where would we put Moshe's? Right, so now that I blocked off everything, even if I put it over here in the north side, but now Moshe's, and I can, for the purposes of this discussion, and make it also go from north to south, right? But still, now I blocked off all of the way with these shulchanot. So where am I going to put this? If I put it anywhere, it's going to be in the lower 20 amot. The idea being that you could have understood it differently, but the implication is that you're going to set up the shulchanot of Shlomo first. But once you do that, you block everything and nobody can go past them. So where would you put Moshe's? That's how Rashi understands the question. Could have said Shulchan of Moshe got here first, and then they set up all the other Shulchanot. It's still going to be difficult. The thing is that if I put it first, that's fine. I could put it here in that quadrant first, and then set up all the other Shulchanot. But the way Rashi seems to understand the question is that he wants to make that, as it were, an unanswerable question. There is no way. It's a rhetorical question, saying that there's no way that you'll be able to bring Moshe's Shulchan into the upper right quadrant. Upper right being on my, I should call it the northwest quadrant. Okay. Anyway, that's how Rashi understands the question. He wants to make that question a question in the sense that can't be answered. So so the Gemara says, so Rashi says, Kulhu eser rosha shel zeh b'tzad rosha shel zeh. Do you think that all of the shulchanot sat in one line, meaning the head of one was up next to the head of the other, like I had in my little illustration? Betray Daria, how we got this. They were in two rows. Chamisha minai rosha shel zeh b'tzad rosha shel zeh. So five of them, in fact, they were head to head. Moses was next to them and not in their line, right? So there was five. For the moment, I'll point to this illustration, but then I'll show you mine, which is more accurate. Okay, so the conclusion, according to Rashi, is that Um, just a second. Rashi gives here 2 points, right? So at this, before I show you the illustrations, Rashi's setting up he's going to set up 2 possibilities, right? Because I still have the possibility that the Shulchanot are going from east to west. So I have to consider that possibility, and I have to consider the other possibility that they were going from north to south. So those are the 2 little illustrations here. The Mandamar Mizrach Marav Hachiyatkin. So according to the Mandamar that they were going from east to west, this is how they sat. And this is, she explained that there's 5 here, there's Moshe's in the middle, and another 5 here. And according to the Mandamar, they're going from north to south, and they would have sat like this. It'd be the same thing, but at a right angle. So here, I'll show this to you in a more proportional way. Let's move this out of the way. And this out of the way. Okay. Doesn't really, oh wait, this happened last time. You just draw a new line here. It's the easiest thing to do. Okay, so this is how Rashi envisions the Shulchanot. So you can put them in here. They'll go from north to south, or you can turn them. Or you can turn them, and then they'll look like that. Then they'll be going from north to south. Okay, so this seemingly answers our question. I understand now that the Shulchanot were set up like this, 5 and 5, with Moshe's in the middle. And at this moment, I understand that whether I go east to west or whether I go from north to south, then I can answer this question. But there is a fly in the ointment, because Gemara says, I think this is actually where we got up to last time. So according to the Manda Amma, Rabbi Yozar, Rabbi Shimon, or Rabbi Shemoah, if you say that the Shulchanot are going from north to south, that's fine. Why is it fine? Because everything fits. Oops. Everything fits. In other words, when I put it in here, it will fit perfectly, because I have 5 shulchanot. The row of 5 shulchanot is 10 amot, and they have to fit in this area 10 amot wide. So I can get them in here exactly. I can put them anywhere. Now, exactly where they would have been in here, they would have been up here, which we'll come to later. But so according to Rabbi Yozar, Rabbi Shemoah, it's fine. They fit in perfectly. But what if I hold like Rebbe, and I hold that they're going from east to west. So ostensibly, it looks like they fit in, but not so fast, because we know other relevant midot. So what are the other relevant midot? Michtei shulchan kama mashuch mina. Right. So according to the Manda Amar, the east to west, Yichdei shulchan kama mashuch min hakotel. So how far is the shulchan away from the kotel? Meaning, how far is it going to be from the northern wall? Shtei amot umechza. It has to be 2.5 amot away. And I know that we'll come back to in a moment. But it's going to be based on this idea, according to Rashi, that we learned earlier, that just like you had to have 2.5 amot between the people who were carrying the Aron, it would be wide enough for 2 people. You also have to have a row that's 2.5 amot open for the 2 people who will be carrying in the lechem apanim, each of them wearing 6 loaves of bread, has to be wide enough for them to walk side by side, right? So, so we need, right next to the northern wall, we're going to need 2.5 amot. The amadide, and then the ama, which is the width of the shulchan itself. So now we're 3.5 amot. Then I need then I need another 2.5 amot between the first row and shulchan, which we said is in the middle, the amadide and its ama, another 2.5 amot between the south side of Moshe Shulchan and the next row, and the width of the ama of an ama for the shulchanot in the south side. Right, so let's see. So then we'll find that half an amma is going to get eaten up in the daram. So if I position this in my illustration, which I can make larger. So I have to position this whole set of shulchanot to begin. So now the shulchanot are now going east to west. To position them 2.5 amot away from the northern wall, which would bring them to here. I have 2.5 amot here. Right, I have 2.5 amot here. I have another 2.5 amot. I have another 2.5 amot here, and then I have another 2.5 amot here. So that's 7.5 amot plus 3 amot, right? Which are with all the shulchanot. That's 10. That's 10.5 amot. So now half of the southern row is going to be in the southern quadrant. It will go over the border. Go over. So this is problematic for Rebbe. How does Rebbe understand this? How does he understand the way the shulchanot are going to be placed? Because they won't fit. Because I need these other midot. I don't get to set them up willy-nilly. I have to follow certain other rules. So before we get to the answer, let's just see Rashi. So we start off by saying this goes well according to the person who says that the shulchanot are going from north to south. Even though it's going to be impossible, some little bit of the shulchan is not going to push over the border and go into the south. It's going to be impossible to get shulchanot that measure altogether 10 amot exactly into a space that's 10 amot. Nonetheless, you can still say whatever is going to pour over into the southern side is going to be less than a tefach. Less than a tefach is not considered. In other words, we don't worry if it's less than a tefach that goes over. Rashi's saying that based on an idea that the Gemara mentions much earlier in the sugya that we didn't do when they were making these kinds of measurements in the Beit HaMikdash, they were not necessarily precise less than a tefach. If something comes within a tefach, okay. So, right. So I showed you, right. So if you take all the shulchanot and you put them 90 degrees, and you have them going from north to south. So in a computer drawing, I can make them come up exactly to the end of 10 amot. Is understanding, especially from the question that Gemara asked earlier, that like there's a certain reality exactly into 10 amot, so you have to leave a room. So we leave you a little wiggle room. If it's less than a tefach, that's fine. So this idea of having two shulchanot with Moshe's in the middle, this works out according to the person the shulchanot are going from north to south. Elamandamar mizrach ma'arav. Excuse me. According to the one who says they're going from east to west, according to Rebbe, from east to west, so now that's the length. The length is going from south. Now the width of them are going from north to length of them are going to east to west, the width of them going north to south. So how far? So basically showed you, but I'll just read it in Rashi. How far is the northern row of shulchan from the northern kotel to? So why? That's enough for the two kohanim who are going to bring in the two starim of lechem apanim, these two stacks, right? You can each have 6 lechem hapanim. It's enough for they to walk in side by side. Because it says that 2 of them would do it simultaneously. But and all together, of course, you need 4. You need 2 on one side and 2 on the other side. And you need this width of 2.5 amot to have 2 people walk next to you. We learned that earlier when we were talking about the staves of the Aron, that they were 2.5 amot apart, and that was the amount that we needed so that we could have 2 people walking next to each other. So then, between the northern row of shulchanot and the shulchan of Moshe, and the width of the shulchanot themselves, and then I have another 2.5 amot between Moses's and the southern row of shulchanot, and also the width of those shulchanot. So then we have, like I showed you, 10.5 amot. So then we find that there's already a half of an amah that's into the daram. So a moment ago we said less than a tefach. That's okay. We'll give you wiggle room for less than a tefach. But here I have half an amah, right? So that's going to be, depending on whether you hold like Rabbi Yehuda or Rabbi Meir, it's going to be either 2 or 3, 2.5 or 3 tvachim, right? It's a big chunk of the shulchan. Basically half, as we pointed out in the illustration, half of the southern row of shulchanot is going to be over the line into the south. And the western shura is going to be pulled away from the western wall of the Heichal by 2.5 amot, and the width of the shulchan. All right, so this is to show you the illustration again. So this is our dilemma. This is going to be here. It's going to be 2.5 amot from the western wall. It's going to be 2.5 amot from it's going to be 2.5 amot from the northern wall, from the western wall, but I'm going to end up with half of the southern shulchanot over into the southern quadrant, and that doesn't jive with what we learned a moment ago. But all of them have to be here in the north. So now the Gemara answers and says, "Mi savar shulchan de Moshe b'Rendayu havigas." Do you think that Moshe's table sat amongst or in between the other tables? Lo demidlele. No, that it was pulled up. They pulled it up and placed it. And they took the other shulchanot and pushed them down over it. Like a student sitting before his master. So, what does that look like? Let's move this back here. Let's get rid of my little arrows. Okay. It would look like this. Close enough. It'll look like this. So now what do I have? I'm going to have 2.5. I'll make the arrows again. So I have 2.5 amot from the northern to the northern set of shulchanot. I have another 2.5 amot between the northern set of shulchanot to the southern set of shulchanot. And now I have plenty of room left over, right? So I have 5 plus 2 is 7. I have another whole 3 amot on the southern side. And what I did is I took Moshe's shulchan, I took it up from the middle. Now I don't need 2.5 amot between Moshe's and either side. I can put Moshe's up here, and I can have plenty of room still for everybody to come in front, and have two people, two sets of Leviim, two sets of Kohanim in front, and on either side here and on either side here. I get my 2.5 amot, 2.5 amot, and even 3 amot here, and Shalom Israel. Everything is fine. So this is our conclusion at this moment, that this is how the Shulchan Aruch might have been placed. That they placed Moshe's closer to the western wall, and the other Shulchanot behind it, as if these Shulchanot of Shlomo they are the students of Moshe's Shulchan. They're sitting low, as it were, lower than Moshe, who would be on top of them, in front of them. Now we're doing an overhead view. Rashi understands this a little bit more literally, as I will show you. Rashi says, "The Moshe Bahadayu Havayasi." Do you think that Moshe sat in between the two sets of shulchanot, the emtza mamash, like really in between? That you would need to have, once you put Moshe's in the middle, then I have to have two areas open that are each 2.5 amot wide between Moshe's and the northern and southern shulchanot. Lo, the midle umanachle. They raised it up and placed it. Shelo yehem munach beinehem mamash. They put Moshe's in such a way that it wasn't sitting right between them really. Ela mashuch mitzad ma'arav. It was pulled westward. Rosho mechuvan keneged avir shebein shtei hashurot. The head of Moshe's shulchan corresponded to the open space that would be between the two rows of Shlomo's shulchanim. Dahashtaleka elechada aprashim. Now there's only one separation of 2.5 amot between the northern and southern sets of shulchanot, as I showed you. Now I want to point out, as I was doing these illustrations, I realized this illustration, which I lifted from the Vilna Shas, and it's almost exactly the same. It's a little bit cleaned up in the new Oz V'Hadar Shas, but I realized it's a mistake. This is not correct. Do you see what the problem is with this illustration as opposed to mine?
Can you switch screens?
Oh, I'm sorry. This is the illustration that's in Shas. What's the difference between their illustration and my illustration? This is it's one of those puzzles. Michael Schwartz.
The Shulchan of Moshe is north to south, not east to west.
Right, and I'm not sure we did it. I think it's misunderstanding. Either, I don't know. It could have just been a typeset, a printing thing. But see, Rashi uses the term rosh to mean the width, right? The head is the width, because he talked about the shulchanot being rosho shel zeh, the head of one is next to the other. That's how we described them when they were talking about them being in a row. So he says that Moshe's was shelo yehem munach beinehem mamash. It was not placed mamash between them. Rather, it was pulled to the northern side. But the Rosho, its head was michuvan, right? It was directed toward the space that was between the two shurot. So that's how I did it. They should all be, and also the other reason it doesn't make sense, not just because of Rashi's language, but this is the shita of Rebbe, who held that the Klim went from east to west, that they went parallel to the northern and southern walls of the bayou. And it was my little triumph for the day that's not an accurate illustration. That's also why I wanted to start to do these illustrations. It's the I don't, they're not trying to be 100% accurate. And went to the original Vilna Shas, they were much more limited in terms of illustrations, because any illustration like that, either they had to hire somebody to etch an illustration like they did in the menorah, or what they did here in the illustration that I showed you, they could take pieces of type and just arrange them, right? So I'm not blaming them. They were much more limited. I am surprised though, because if you look in the new Shas, it was completely retypeset. They did it the same way. They have no excuse. So I'm going to point this out. I'm going to actually send in these illustrations to Al HaTorah, and I'll see if they'll put their website.
I wondered to play devil's advocate here.
What's that?
Just to play devil's advocate here, but it strikes me that, like, when I've been at big gatherings and there are multiple tables, the head of the table where the Rebbe sits and newlyweds sit or what have you, in fact, is perpendicular that way. And so maybe, in fact, when they're saying rosh, they mean like the rosh as it would be at a banquet. This the rosh as it would be at a seudah.
It's a very creative.
How is that?
It's a very creative solution, but it doesn't really fit into. It doesn't really fit into the words here. K'talmid hayoshev lifnei rabo. I am imagining it. I'm sorry. I'm not laughing at you. I do think it's a very creative idea, but it has nothing to do with what we're talking about here. But I appreciate you're trying to play devil's advocate, and you should always be encouraged to do that. K'talmid hayoshev lifnei rabo. So what does it mean? So Rashi says something interesting here. So the way I pointed out to you, it's like the Talmid in front of the Talmid who's sitting in front of his Rebbe, where the Rebbe would be at the. Now, before I look at Rashi, I could understand the Gemara quite simply, just to mean that this here with Moshe's Shulchan, that's the head of the room because it's closest to the western wall, which is closest to the Kodesh HaKodeshim. And the master is going to be at the head of the room, and the Tom is going to sit in front of him further away. That's a simple way of understanding the Gemara. Rashi, though, says something very interesting here. He says, because the Talmid sits lower than the master. But the master would sit up higher, and the Talmidim would sit lower than him. Similarly, Shlomo's Shulchanot were lower than Moshe's. The Beit HaMikdash hayam because the Beit HaMikdash, meaning the floor of the Beit HaMikdash, was slanted. It went up as it went westward.
That would pose practical. I imagine that posing practical problems where the placing of the Lechma Panim is concerned. Wouldn't they just slide?
I think it's the whole thing is interesting. Say though, let's say Rashi's correct. I mean, who am I to argue with Rashi? Other Rishonim argued with Rashi, but I'm not. I can't argue with Rashi. So the way Rashi might answer you is to say it was just a little bit. It was a very minor grade. Maybe it was in 5 degrees. Maybe it was 2 degrees higher or something like that.
Or maybe,
and say,
or maybe the eastern leg was slightly longer than the western leg.
the eastern leg was like, what do you mean?
So meaning that instead of
For the way, that they made the shulchanot so that the shulchanot would actually would be level.
Mhm.
Also, that's no, that would be harder because the dimensions of the shulchan with its legs are dictated in the Torah.
Nacham.
I could fetch it and say that the Torah tells me the length of the legs, but doesn't say that they all have to sit on a flat plane. But let's not go there. There are other, as I'm thinking about, there are other reasons that will. But nonetheless, you raise a good point because, and we didn't do thinking of going back and doing it. We saw we did it in a kind of cursory way. We saw the Mishnah that discussed the replacing of the lechem apanim. Now, to understand greater depth, to understand exactly how that worked, we'd have to go the sugya at the beginning of right after the Mishnah here. And the truth is, Michael Werner, you have a good point, because even if it would be a slight grade, you could imagine that technically it might not work. It might cause the one or the both stacks of the lechem apanim to fall over, or certainly not to. It would not be easy to get them to sit straight. Nonetheless, this is how Rashi learns. So he understands that the Beit HaMikdash itself was mishupah. I don't know, and I plead ignorance. I didn't look at some other Rishonim here, but I didn't look to see, for people who try to defend Rashi, how Rashi would have known this. When you learn Masechet Midot, this does not come out. When you learn Masechet Midot, and it talks about beginning from the eastern wall onto Har HaBayit, and then the eastern entrance into the Beit HaMikdash. We know that Har HaBayit is a har, and the whole temple pound is gradual. It goes up in levels. This is described in detail in the Mishnah, and apparently you can see still some of this to this day over near the in the old city. But we know it was built in such a way that that by the time you get to the Beit HaMikdash proper, you've gradually gone up several amot from where you entered onto Har HaBayit. But it doesn't say in the Mishnah that any of those surfaces are slanted. The presumption is that they're all flat. So Rashi's source seems to be from here. In other words, in order for Rashi to understand this line of Ketalmida Yoshev Lifnei Rabo, so Rashi understands, what does that mean? It means students sit lower, literally lower than the master. So that would mean that their part of the Heichal must have been lower. So it must have been on a grade. It must have been on a slant. That seems to be Rashi's understanding. And this seems to be Rashi's source, is just from that line of Ketalmid HaYoshev Lifnei Rabo. You know what? I'll leave that for now. We'll take Rashi's pshat just as it is. But like I say, I could have said differently than Rashi, and I could still say that it's Ketalmid HaYoshev Lifnei Rabo, simply because Moshe Shulchan is at the head of us. It's toward the western wall.
Or
Rashi,
maybe in other words, that the ascent is not just in physical elevation, but in holiness. And the closer one gets to the Kodesh HaKodashim, the sun is, moving from the east to the west. In fact, isn't Aliyah, the Kedusha.
very good, very well put, very well put. So Moshe's is closer to the Moshe's is closer to the Kodesh HaKodashim. It's at a higher level of Kedusha, and then the Talmidim, the Note of Shlomo, are behind. So before I go on in the Gemara, so let's just remind ourselves. So what are we up to in the Gemara? We have a machlokas between Rabbi and Rabbi Ozar ben Shemoah about whether the Shulchanot are going north to south or east to west. So at this point, what we figured out is that, just a second. According to Rebbe, who says the Shulchanot are going from east to west, this must have been the configuration, or this was a likely configuration, that Moshe's is not literally in between the two Shulchanot, rather it's pulled away. And that way I can have just 2.5 in the north and south sets of Shulchanot, and I can still get everything that I need to get into this northwest quadrant. According to Rabbi Ozar ben Shemoah, according to Rabbi Ozar ben Shemoah, I actually could have gone with the original configuration, right? I could have put this. Well, probably would have been okay, but I could have. I could have positioned it like this.
Can you bring up the other screen?
Oh, I'm sorry. 1 second. I could have positioned it like this. Hold on. I'm screwing up my illustration. These things are very finicky. There we go. See here, then I would have, now they're going from north to south. I would have one set of Shulchanot 2.5 amot away from the western wall. I'd have Moshe, and have these other ones here. And granted, in order to have access now to the Shulchanot, the Kohanim who are bringing in are going to have to walk into the southern quadrant, but nobody said there's anything wrong with it. It's just that the Shulchanot themselves all have to be in the northern quadrant. So the way I've answered this, what the Gemara has done is it has supported, at this point, I've supported both shitot. I could say either one, either north to south or east to west. Both of them are legitimate shitot. It's just that if I say that they're going from east to west, then the configuration has to be this. It has to be with Moshe's pulled out in front, whereas according to the north to south shita, Moshe's could be in the middle, literally in the middle. That's what I'm up to right now in the Gemara. Let's go back and do a little bit more of the Gemara. Just a sec. Right, the Midahil Manachle. No, right, no, so right, so the Gemara says, so do you think that Moshe Shulchan was in between the other two sets of Chanot? No, it was pulled up and placed, and then they lowered the other ones a little bit, like a Talmud in front of the Rav. Rashi says they lowered a little bit, Moshivam Litzad Mizrach b'makom namo. They took the two sets of Shulchanot and made them go more eastward in a lower place. And as we understand, Rashi understands literally as a lower place. Actually, this is a good place to stop. So were these illustrations help?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, good. I felt last week I went back and I looked at the video and I saw toward the end I was making these illustrations on the whiteboard, which were okay, but I think these are better for our understanding. And the Luneder, I'll try to make time. I'll try to make time to make these into individual plates, right? Individual illustrations. Just so you know that the paper size that I used here was an A2 paper, which is 4 times the size of an A4. So I'll figure out a way though of sending to that they want to print them out on an A4. They won't come out like a big, like won't print out 4 sheets. I have to work on that a little bit. The reason I use the A2 size instead of the A4 is just it's easier for me to measure 20. Like when I'm doing something that's 40 centimeters long, I need at least an A3, and then I decided I'll go to A2 because then I have all this extra room on the page to move around my illustrations. But yeah, I think this will be helpful, and I'll try to make more illustrations as we go. So, but that's it for now. Next week we'll continue on to finish up this part of the sugya. Just a second. Oh, right. The next part of the sugya here goes into a discussion about if they actually used if they actually put lechem hapanim on all of the shulchanot or only on Moshe's. It raises some very interesting questions. One of the questions, of course, is why did Shlomo in any event make all these extra shulchanot? I mentioned there's a drasha that says there's a remez in the Torah that 10 more menorot could be made and 10 more shulchanot could be made. But it doesn't explain it still doesn't explain exactly why Shlomo made them. Do you have any thoughts about that? Why would Shlomo have made so many shulchanot and menorot, and also he made 10 more kiorim?
The Shubach.
Yeah, it's just simple. I think that's the simple answer. The simple answer is, Yoter Mefuah, right? It was more glorious. Yoter Meshubach. It was more praiseworthy to have more stuff. And that,
but if we're looking at the the different kelim that were in the original Mishkan, what we get is not simply a description of the kelim, but a description of where the materials came from and who donated the materials. And so it commemorates not just the, it commemorates not just the relationship between sort of the collective Bnei Yisrael and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but it also commemorates each person, each tribe's particular contribution to that relationship. And so you've got a bigger population, so you need sort of, in some sense, if part of the work of the Mishkan, or part of the work of the Bayit is that kind of commemoration, you need more kelim, you need more material. Since you just have you have bigger.
Say the last line again. Wait, I was following you up until the very end. In the Mishkan, it explains that the materials for the Mishkan were a contribution from all of Bnei Israel.
Right.
Okay, and therefore what? What do you get from that?
So, in the kingdom of Shlomo, there's simply more Bnei Yisrael. There's a finer breakdown of different parts of the society, and so in order to commemorate them all, you need more material. So each person, so each tribe could conceivably say, okay, this is from me, this is from me.
The reason I'm shaking my head is that doesn't seem to come out anywhere in Melachim or Divrei Yamim. It says Shlomo made the Shulchanot. Shlomo made the Menorot. I thought what you were going to say is that was the difference. That in the Mishkan, that was the Trumat of the entire Am. But Shlomo made his own contribution, right? He was the wealthiest man in the world. And so he made his own contribution. He makes his own contribution. So if it would have been from each tribe separately, first of all, then we would have expected to have 12 more Shulchanot and not 10, right? The idea of the 10 is also a very interesting thing because you end up with 11 of everything.
You'd have 12 minus the Kohanim and minus
no. That's the way 12 gets counted, right? So this is something you have to always follow very carefully throughout Tanakh, both in the Torah and when you go into Yoshua and later on. How do you get 12 tribes? You start off because there are 12 sons, right? So you start off with sons, but then what happens? You get a 13th tribe. How do you get a 13th tribe?
Yosef is split.
Yosef is split. So all of a sudden you have really 13 tribes because Yaakov himself says that Ephraim and Menashe are going to be in place of Yosef. So it's as if Yosef, right? And that's the whole idea. Yosef, who was the Bechor to Rachel, but not the Bechor to Yaakov, but he was the Bechor to Rachel, he gets the portion of the Bechor, he gets the double portion. So now we have 13 tribes. But as we've been reading recently from, earlier on in Bamidbar and include even up until this week's Parsha, how is the land going to be divided amongst the tribes? There are 13 tribes. How does it get divided?
The Levites don't get a portion.
The Levites don't get a portion. Of course, Hanim are Levim, so they don't get a portion. They get cities. They have dedicated cities.
As in fact we read in this week's parsha.
Exactly. As I said, this has been a theme now. It started in Parshat Pas, and then it's repeated again. The basic aspects of it are repeated again in this week's parsha, right? So, the tribes that are being that are considered in terms of chiluk in terms of Chiluk Haaretz, are only the 12 tribes. They're all the 12 tribes, including Ephraim and Manasseh, but not Levi. Levi doesn't get as a Chelek Ba'aretz. They get cities that are scattered around different parts of the land that are in the halakim of other tribes. The point is, it's a push me to kind of situation. Is that for most intents and purposes, at any time, we're only going to count 12 tribes, because either for Chiluk Haaretz or in terms of the sons of Yaakov, there's always really only going to be 12 tribes. It's a very interesting thing. There's 12 tribes, and then this kind of shadow. I don't know if shadow is the right word. You have this spectral 13th tribe, right, which is also there. Anyway, that's an interesting thing. It wasn't the point, but the point was that this is Michael Werner. This is what I thought you were going to say, and I think this would. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think this would be a more reasonable thing to say. That right, Parshat Shema. What?
Since when am I reasonable?
The Parshat Shema starts off with the idea that all of Bnei Israel are Toreim, they all contribute. But when it comes to Beit Shel Shlomo, it says Shlomo built, Shlomo did everything. And so whatever he added on to the Beit HaMikdash that wasn't in the Mishkan, that was of him. And then you can understand that then I could understand it in different ways. Like you could say it like Michael Schwartz said, that this was like a Tiferet, right? This is like for a greater glory. And since he had the wherewithal, he wanted to make the Beit HaMikdash more glorious as it were than the Mishkan. So he doubles it in size and he adds more kelim. I suspect that other people have better, much better, but they have made more like deeper explanations. But it's an interesting thing. Once we know though that there were 10 shulchanot and 10 menorot and 10 kiorim, which I don't think we're going to get into exactly how they were placed, but now we need to know how they were placed. One of the reasons it's important for us to know how they're placed is something that we learned back in Yoma, that on Yom Kippurim, the Kohen Gadol has to go through the Heichal and get into the Kodesh HaKodeshim. So we need to know his roots. And by the time we finish with this, we're going to have 10 Shulchanot plus 1 in the north. We're going to have 10 menorot, 1 in the south, and we're going to have the Mizbeach HaZahav in the middle. And so I need to know how he got, where he went and how he got around. And if you remember, there was a machloket about that. There was a difference of opinion about the route that he would take. And as I say, next we'll pick up on the continuation of the sugya here to discuss if all of the shulchanotim and arot were simultaneously functional. Did they actually put lechem on every shulchan? Did they actually light every menorah? And leave it at that. Okay. So next week.
All right, good night. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.